Why I was gazing at a light that was there and wasn't there.
Mysteries, mindfuck, and magic. Welcome to the other world.
And welcome today our special guest. We're very honored to have you here, Dr. Dean Radin.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So you have written several books about the overlapping of consciousness and science. And your latest book, Real Magic, is, it's fantastic. We've recommended it several times so far. And in that book, you had your last sentence, magic is real, let's deal with it. And you had a sigil there, and you've devised a sigil experiment. But before we go into that, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. So my name is Dean Radin. I'm chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is in California, but actually after COVID, it's sort of all over the place now. We're a virtual organization mostly. This was started by Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon. And he had a mystical experience in space. And so when he came back to Earth, the way he put it was that he had spent his life up to that point exploring outer space, and now he wanted to explore inner space to try to understand what the nature of a mystical experience is. So we're all scientists. We're traditionally trained in different disciplines. The Institute is now 50 years old, and we've primarily been studying what used to be called, our mission was the frontiers of consciousness, which is about the capacities of consciousness. What is it? What is its nature? What can it do? All those sorts of things. So the easiest way of understanding, or at least of exploring consciousness, is to do what William James and many others had recommended, which was to look where things don't fit very well. So we know very well how to study the brain, and there are correlates of consciousness, but a correlation doesn't imply causation. And so there is, as we know in the esoteric traditions, consciousness is considered to be fundamental. And that is not the prevailing issue within science. So we wanted to look at phenomena suggesting that maybe the esoteric traditions are correct. So the way to do that the most easily is through psychic phenomena. So we study the whole range of different kinds of psychic phenomena. And within the last couple of years, which eventually led to two books, one was called Supernormal, which is the Eastern esoteric traditions, and then Real Magic, which is the Western esoteric traditions. It occurred to me that I had been studying psychic abilities now for something like 40 years, but they overlap very strongly with magical phenomena. And in a book I'm currently writing, which will come out next year, I'm basically saying that they're essentially the same thing. Magic and psi are exactly the same thing from slightly different language, different culture, perspectives, and that sort of thing, but it's the same. And so the value then of using science to study magical practices is, first of all, to find out within the literature of parapsychology, up until very recently, most parapsychologists, and I'm talking about scientists who study psychic phenomena, are very reluctant to actually admit that they're studying magic, because of the same reason that magic has had a stigma for the last couple of hundred years. Parapsychology strives to be academic, and in the academic world, you can't talk about such things. And even in the academic world, you can't talk about psychic phenomena either, which is one of the reasons why we're at a private institute, so we can do whatever we want. But we also face the same challenges of people who are in the academic system and want to publish their research. It's very difficult, except in specialty journals, which nobody pays attention to except for us. Well, that is beginning to change. So one of the reasons why I decided to write another book on this is because when I wrote Real Magic in 2018 that came out, I was already saying in that book that the paradigm about consciousness was changing very quickly. And even in the last 5 years, it has changed so fast that I felt it was time to write another book to say, essentially, I told you so, that in the academic world and mainstream thought leaders now across many disciplines, the notion that consciousness may not be exactly what we were thinking as a brain-centric thing, but something more fundamental than that, it's now everywhere. Dozens of centers at universities for study of consciousness and dozens of conferences all the time, now entertaining seriously first panpsychism, and then maybe dual aspect monism, and then idealism. Well, idealism is the esoteric tradition. And from those, if when you go from materialism, panpsychism, maybe dual aspect monism, and a few other varieties, and then idealism, suddenly things like magic and psychic phenomena become easy to understand. In fact, you can predict that they must occur. So that's where we're going. And the paradigm is shifting quickly. So one of the chapters in my book is, after the paradigm shifts, then what? Well, it's an interesting question, right? It's the resurrection of magic. So magic has been suppressed for about 500 years, and it's going to come back. And I think it'll come, each time it comes back, it's a little bit different because of the nature of culture and knowledge at the time. So I think what's going to happen is that when science actually can bring its big guns, so to speak, at what magic is, we will have the opportunity of learning things that even within traditional magic have not been found yet. That may be suspected based on empiricism, but we'll have better ways of understanding it. And that's both great because we'll learn more about what we're capable of, and it's also very, very dangerous because it can do all kinds of things that, at least within the mainstream today, we think, well, that's not even possible. Well, yeah, it probably is possible. All kinds of strange things are possible. And so if we're not more mature at the same time, and magic gets out of hand, because it's both suppressed and enhanced by cultural acceptance, we could either be in line for a utopia or a dystopia. And I don't know which one we're going towards. History does not make me very optimistic about this, but I am also a chronic optimist. So I think maybe we'll be able to pull ourselves out of this one. So that's my spiel. So other than working as a scientist on magic and psychic phenomena, one of the projects that we started at IONS, our Institute of Noetic Sciences, was what we call psi genes. So we're interested in the idea that there was a genetic component to psychic talent, because there's a lot of lore about such things. And the same is true in the magical traditions. So we did a small-scale study to look at the genomes of people who are psychic from psychic families as compared to controls. And we found some interesting indications that there are differences. And a project that is now ongoing is looking at the MRIs, or brain morphology, for people who have extraordinary experiences. And there too, we find differences. So it becomes more and more likely that there actually are genetic and morphological differences in the brain for people who have these experiences. One of the aspects that could result from that is we can figure out how to make people more psychic. And through genetic engineering now, you can do that permanently or temporarily without psychedelics, because we think psychedelics can do that too, except that it creates distortions which are difficult to get through. You'll get information, but it's distorted. So we think maybe there's a way of doing it so you can take an average person and make a super psychic or super magician out of them, permanently or temporarily, given the different genetic editing methods. So what I did as a result, working with a colleague, we created a company which does neurogenetic engineering. And so we use both DNA methods and RNA methods. And our initial target is dementia, because there are no treatments for memory problems. And we figured that would be an interesting target. And it turns out that what we've done, as compared to publishing studies on psi or magic, we're easily able to publish studies in a Nature journal, which is the top journal in the world, and also Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences journal. So the science underneath what we're doing is as good as it gets. We can get like ordinary stuff, in this case, genetic engineering, into those journals. The same kind of science goes into studying spooky things, and then we're quite limited. So So my other day job is I'm chairman of this company that I co-founded, and we hope we're about a year away from doing clinical trials, maybe less, to do clinical trials on this treatment that we have shown that works really, really well in mice and rats. And we also know that it works in human neurons in vitro. So it'll probably work in humans, and it will be a very significant improvement in memory. And so for mild cognitive impairment and mild dementia, it would make a significant difference for a lot of people. But see, in the back of our mind, we're also thinking we could use the same method, which is simply an intranasal delivery system of genetic edits. If we figure out what we need to tweak in terms of receptors or genes in the brain, we could do that.
Fascinating. I mean,
So that was a long-winded introduction.
Totally fine and quite mind-blowing. I wasn't aware about the latest what's the word? Sorry, the latest work you were doing regarding that. That went completely by me, but really fascinating. Simply for people who have those troubles, and a bit creepy thinking about the implications. And I mean, we had the weaponization of psi since the 1960s, or roughly, the Stargate project, and etc., the remote viewing program and similar stuff. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm not looking forward to it, but we will see where we go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I brought up the issue of
Yeah.
any new advancement in knowledge is a kind of a power, and are we wise enough to use the power? That's an important consideration. So when it comes to gene editing, it can solve all kinds of very interesting medical problems that are currently intractable, but it also can create new ones. So the ethics of how we proceed in this case is a difficult one. So yeah, I mean, one of the ways of doing our treatment is that it would help resolve chronic anxiety. Well, there are other ways of dealing with that. And so would you want to do a genetic edit to do that? Well, maybe not. But when it comes to something like dementia, of which there are no other treatments, and especially since a large percentage of dementia patients end up with Alzheimer's, which is fatal, is it worth the risk? Probably.
Yeah, most
The
likely.
downside is if we have a way of improving memory, will students start using it, right? They'll take off-label uses of it and start snorting our intranasal delivery system, just like they're using things already, stimulants essentially, in school. Well, that probably would not be such a good thing. So yeah, so this is always a quandary you have when you're working on the edge of the known, because we don't know what's going to happen with it.
And at the same time, it's done already. Yeah, people take Ritalin or whatever it is called elsewhere, or they do psi, like the remote viewing, which is applied in the military and espionage. So it's not really that it's not done already. So it's just more bubbling to the surface, so to say. Yeah, interesting
I
times.
wonder what Philip K. Dick would have made out of your developments.
He probably wrote about it somewhere. I mean, his mind was out there already. Yeah, so the Stargate program is interesting because I worked on that program back in the mid 80s. And I have the same concerns that you're just expressing now, that is this such a great thing or not? And the reason why I convinced myself that it actually was a valuable program and hope that actually there still is such a program is because within the various world of the military and intelligence, we get into trouble when we don't have good intelligence. Like if we don't know what is happening in another country, it has become much more dangerous. So all of our intelligence apparatus is constantly trying to figure out what are they really up to? What are they doing? What do they want to do? And every country is doing this with every other country. So the whole point of that project was to reduce secrecy. And the irony is within a top secret environment, which is intended to protect secrecy. So I felt that there was a little bit of a schizophrenic split there, that we're doing extremely secret classified work to dissolve secrets. I couldn't quite wrap my head around that. So yeah, but that's what it was about.
Yeah. But let's go back to the topic of our interview, your Sigil experiment. So for most of our viewers aren't familiar with what you have been devising. So if you could summarize what the experiment was all about, what this box,
Yes.
what
Your
role
box
the box
number
played, and so
152. That is your box. So your serial number
Yes.
152.
yes.
So Sigil is an acronym meaning scientific investigation of gazing with intuition at light. And of course, it also means like a magical sigil. So the idea comes about from a different grant that I got, and I've been working on this line of research now for over 10 years, which is looking at the quantum observer effect, which is one of the peculiarities of quantum mechanics, which is quite different than classical mechanics, where we know in quantum mechanics that if you look at quanta, things like photons, electrons, and so on, that their behavior changes if you look at them than if you don't look at them. Well, looking at measurement, observation, all of those words kind of revolving around the idea of what do you know about the particle? If you know something, it somehow knows that you know when it changes its behavior. So the classical way of looking at that phenomenon is through the double slit interference system with a photon. So most of the experiments we did, something like 15 or 18 of such experiments with double slit optical systems, we would ask people to imagine that they could get knowledge about what the photons were doing inside the apparatus. So they couldn't see it with their eye, they had to see it in their mind's eye. And to encourage the connection then with the behavior of the photons, we typically would provide immediate feedback about what was going on inside the apparatus. And there are a variety of ways of doing that. But while you're trying to mentally connect with the system, you're connecting through the feedback. And then there would be a period where you're not trying to mentally connect, and there would be no feedback. So that was kind of the switch back and forth. So a typical experiment would have like 20 minutes of 30 seconds attention towards and 30 seconds attention away, and you just flip back and forth a lot. So I had been doing that, and finally now there are a total of 5 different laboratories who have done the same kind of experiment with the double slit system. And overall, it's pretty clear that we're getting interesting results. But the name of the game in science to get anybody to pay attention to something is many, many replications. And so I could continue doing this forever and people still won't pay attention to it because it's just me. So I wanted to find a way of increasing the ease of replication. And so one of the ways of doing that is providing an apparatus that measures interference that would be cheap enough to actually make and then send to people. So that's the box that you just held up. It's a interference system. It's using diffraction. It's a diffraction grating rather than a double slit. But the concept is the same, that you have a single beam that goes straight through with a laser, and then you have several dots on either side. And a double slit system, you'd have these wavy lines. In the box that you have a single dot straight through and then 2 dots on either side. And this is what happens when you set it through a diffraction grating, which is 10,000 lines per inch, as opposed to 2 lines or 2 slits. It's 10,000 slits. So it's simply a different way of measuring interference. And then the question is, when you're paying attention to it, does the interference decline? And so I used a measure of ratio of the illumination in the center versus illumination on the side. And that gives you a very simple way of measuring how much interference is going on. So when you were doing the task, you were presented with a screen that said, now relax, with no feedback, and now another screen where you're seeing a squiggly line, which is the feedback signal, and also an audio tone, and also a little LED light on the top, which would change colors. You are getting feedback from the middle beam, the straight through beam, which is like the particle nature of light, and one of the side beams, which is the wave nature of light. But there's another sensor on the other side, which you're not getting feedback on. So one of the reasons I did that is because I want to know, are you engaging with the feedback and therefore only influencing that sensor, or are you engaging with the entire system, in which case the other sensor would show the same effect, so that even though you didn't get feedback on it. So I set it up in that way. So the original grant for this came from a foundation called the S.I.G.I.L Foundation. And S.I.G.I.L is a pharmaceutical company in Portugal, but they also support parapsychological research. It's one of the only foundations in the world that does this. So I got a grant to do the experiment I just described. And then the box that I had planned to make was going to be made by a colleague of mine. And he was wealthy enough to be able to self-fund the creation of it, but unfortunately became ill and had to withdraw his support. So now I was down $25,000, which would be what it was going to cost to make all this stuff. I'm thinking, well, now what? Because, I mean, the clock is ticking. I need $25,000. Where do I get $25,000? 1 week later, I get an email from the organization called RENCEP, Research Network for the Study of Esoteric Practices, and they invited me to be on their advisory board, and they wanted a scientific experiment of a magical process. And so, well, how much do you have? $25,000. So essentially, I got exactly what I needed about 1 week after I suddenly realized with horror, oh my God, I need something. Well, so in another context, I wouldn't admit this, but I did a magical procedure at that time to say, I need something now. And so I pivoted a little bit. The underlying experiment is the same, but I devised it in such a way so that I would recruit people, about half of whom were practicing magicians and half of whom were mainly meditators. And so I did this worldwide process where we had 2,700 people take the initial questionnaires. And then I sifted down through them, picking out people who looked like they were about half magicians and half meditators, typically long-term, and many also were martial artists, which also is good. And what I'm looking for there is the ability to have focused concentration. And of two types. Like meditators, typically the meditation is internal, not exclusively, but largely, especially mindfulness meditation. It's like internal stuff. Whereas magic is also a kind of meditation, but it's external stuff. So it's a convenient way of looking and comparing between the two types of ways that attention can be used. And then the people I selected, I asked them to do attention performance tasks, which was various kinds of vigilance tasks to see, could you maintain attention without mind wandering too quickly? And then I selected down from that and asked each person to send a video to say, well, why do you think you're good for this experiment? So each one of these was a bunch of hoops, because I was going to ask each person, as you know, to do 10 formal sessions, which is a total of 5 hours to participate. And then I offered $100 for people who finished, and there will also be a drawing on an iPad for the people with the top half of performance. So we went through that whole process. They selected 50 people, and it turns out that I forget whether it's 23 or 24, 47 people out of the 50 had finished, which when you do an experiment is a very, very good return rate. So I spent a lot of time poking people in email and helping people get everything working and so on. And it's a little bit of a miracle that it actually worked anyway, because I shipped everything from everywhere in the US and Europe and Australia, and the box, almost all of the boxes survived. A few didn't. But yeah, 47 people out of the 50 finished. So I have, and I was actually planning for 40, because I pre-registered the analyses on a site where you pre-register how you're going to do an experiment. So you're then locked into, you can only analyze it this way. You can do other things too, which I will do, which is exploratory work, but there's 3 formal hypotheses in this, which have nothing to do with magic yet, but I have exploratory ideas there too. So one is that when you're engaging with the system, that the interference will go down. That's the collapse of the wave function, so-called. So the way that I devised the metric was that interference going down would make a signal go up. So if you were getting the sound going up and the little squiggly line going up, all of that would mean interference was actually declining. And the reason I did that is because it's easier for people to engage with signals that go up than to go down for some reason. So I made it that way. So the hypothesis was that looking at this differential measure between focus towards and focus away, or pull your attention away, that number would go up. So that's a directional hypothesis. That's what the first hypothesis was, and analyzed in a certain way. The second hypothesis was that because it's very difficult for people to do anything for 30 seconds without mind wandering, that we would see a change in variance in the signal. Not just a movement up, but a change in how variable it was. And the reason is that we've done a lot of studies where we show in EEG that if somebody is asked to now meditate or concentrate for 30 seconds or so, we can do it really well for about 5 seconds. And then you start dreaming about cheeseburgers. And then you remember, oh, no, I was supposed to do this. And you come back. And so if that actually is having an effect on the system, you'd have high variance. Like you see an effect and then drops away because your mind was somewhere else, and then it goes up again. And that's the variance effect, as compared to you've withdrawn your attention, in which case nothing should be happening. It should be pretty quiet. So that prediction is that you will see a variance effect. The third prediction is that people who do well in their first 5 sessions will continue to do well in their last 5 sessions. And vice versa, people who don't won't. And that has to do with talent, because we have found in other experiments that some people just do well in any task. And so there's something like talent involved in these things. So I've analyzed all 3 of these pre-registered analyses. The first hypothesis is not significant. So it's not showing a uniform collapse of the wave function, so-called. The variance measure is significant. That is showing that there's more variability in the signal when paying attention than not, which is why I put that hypothesis in there. And the third hypothesis about talent also shows that people who did well tend to continue to do well in the second half, and people who didn't do well don't. So even though everyone was very highly selected, even there, the ideal thing you do in this kind of experiment is everything that I've just done is a preliminary test to find the people who had talent and then do it again. But you need time and money to do all that, and I'm running out of time and money to do it. So this is like a one-shot, but I've learned a lot in the process, and I think we'll do something like this again, probably with better equipment even. So now the split in terms of magic. So one of the questions that I asked on the questionnaire is a paranormal belief questionnaire, where one of the items was witchcraft. And while witchcraft is not exactly magic, it's pretty darn close. And it correlates with things like belief in psi in general and precognition and so on. So I split everybody, I sort everybody according to their belief in witchcraft. I internally thinking magic. I sort them by magic. And then look at the people with the least belief and the most belief, which, by the way, all of the people are already very high beyond the average, like the population norm. So everyone's already self-selected, but still you can separate people who are, and this is a 7-point scale, a whole bunch of people max out at 7. So like total belief in all of it. And then there are others who dribble away and are much less than that. So you get a significant improvement in results for the people on the magic side as compared to the meditators. So this was not a prediction that I pre-registered, but I did have it in mind because of what I had previously described just now, that there's internal attention and there's external attention, or internal intention and external attention. And this experiment requires an external push. It may actually not really require that. If we go full-blown idealism, everything's sort of in your head anyway, It's some in consciousness space, but nevertheless, we're used to dealing with objects out there. And in this case, you're dealing with an object out there, which is much closer to magic than it would be to a form of meditation. So that was significant. So I'm now looking at a variety of other things, like a couple of people did really, really well, like crazy well, and which makes me suspicious. So I didn't talk about it when I did the recruitment process, but in that box that you have, there's a whole bunch of sensors. I mean, it's just chock full of lots of sensors. And the reason that they're in there is because an interferometer is extremely sensitive to things in the environment. So I wanted to know that you accidentally put the box next to the window when you're doing the experiment where it's going to have light on it, it's going to have changes in heat, all kinds of things going on. I need to know that in order to understand what to do with the data. Like maybe I shouldn't even use that session. So in every session, I check every single sensor and look for things like it was accidentally bumped, it was subjected to heat and cold, it had too much light, it had all kinds of things like that. And in fact, about 10 to 15% of the sessions are dropped automatically by algorithm. And that is also in the pre-registration. So I don't have wiggle room there to decide when I'm going to drop. I had registered that if these things happen, I'm not going to use that session. Because otherwise, we'd even do that in the laboratory. I mean, if you don't want to deal with an artifact. Okay, so I looked in detail at all of those sensors, and two of the boxes look like there's an artifact, and it looks like there's probably a light artifact. So there was like too much light happening at some times and not enough at other times. So I'm trying to figure out what to do with that. The easiest thing is to simply not use that data at all, to simply drop all of that data. I prefer not to do that because people went through a lot of effort to work on the project, and I'd like to keep as much data as I can. At this point, I haven't decided yet. And all of this, see, this is all now post hoc in the sense that the pre-registration with all of the data that passed all of my predefined tests, that gives a significant variance effect and a talent effect. If I take those two boxes out, then much of these effects go away. And so I was thinking about this and saying, well, I pre-registered it. I mean, I have to report that result because that's what you do, right? You register. But on further examination of the results, I'm finding that actually was dependent on two boxes, which were pretty deviant from the other results. There's no evidence that the people who had the boxes were monkeying with them. There's no evidence that they were being pushed or heated or anything like that. So it occurred to me that as you find in magic, one of the, like switch into parapsychology for a minute, one of the theories about what's going on in a psi experiment is called conformance theory, which is really close to magic, because what it says is that you want a certain outcome to happen. And it kind of doesn't matter how it happens, right? You open it up to the universe and the universe will do whatever it needs to do in order to be able to produce this result. And so I had that in mind when I was actually putting this whole thing together. I don't really care too much how I get a significant result, but I really, really want a significant result. So as it turns out, these two boxes did exactly what was necessary in order to take the data and actually push it in directions so that it would split the data in a way that would make a significant result, which turned out to be compatible with conformance theory. And so one way I think about this is as follows. We know from quantum mechanics that you can devise all the quantum mechanics from what Richard Feynman came up with, which is the sum of paths. And the notion is that it's as though we live in a cloud of an infinite number of different possibilities for the next moment. And so that this branching cloud of many, many things that could happen, probabilistic things. And your intention seems to be able to steer a little bit in one direction versus the other. And so, and of course, the branching is such that if your intention is really good, you can steer along this branch and end up in a place which is a priori extremely unlikely, but nevertheless, you can get there. Because in quantum mechanics, everything is probable. You can get to those other places. So the conformance theory then says that when you have an intention that in the future you want this particular outcome, well, how am I going to get there? Well, there's many, many different ways that things could arrange themselves, some of which I'm responsible for, and many other things out there, different ways. So this experiment arranged itself in such a way, probably the easiest way, as I'm thinking of it, the easy way to have arranged the results to give me a significant result that I see, including the split in terms of magical people versus meditator people, was to make these two boxes deviate in the way that they did. So this is, from a scientific perspective, this is not so good, because this means that something happened in it. But from a magical perspective, that's exactly what you want. Something happened. I got the money to do the experiment, and then I got more money so I can finish the boxes, and then the boxes behaved in a strange way, and now I get the results that I want. So I don't know where in the world I'm going to be able to publish this article, because it, from a strict scientific perspective, it has all the bells and whistles that you're supposed to have, pre-registered and everything. And you have to report everything that really happened. So I have to report that, well, at least two of these boxes look a little bit strange. But I'm using exploratory methods now to say, if I get rid of those boxes, do I have anything left over? And the answer is yes, fortunately. There's still interesting stuff left over. It's not as spectacularly good as it was before, but it's still there. So I have a way of saying, well, okay, we can, at each step along the way, you're making it more and more conservative, right? The whole thing is conservative, so you're making sure you're not fooling yourself. But even getting rid of any possible suspect piece of data, you still end up with something interesting. So that's the long and short of it.
Is my box one of these two boxes?
No.
Glad.
No, you have a fine box.
Okay.
Box 152, yes.
Yeah. Because there was, from the beginning, something strange. As soon as I knew that I would participate in your experiment, I had this image in my mind sitting on my living room table on my laptop, and the box plugged in and doing this experiment. It took a long time to arrive in Austria, but then I was just too lazy to get my laptop out, and I plugged it into my desktop computer, and it wouldn't work. However I tried, it didn't work. And we exchanged emails, and then I said, okay, maybe I'll stick to what I saw in my mind. Got out my laptop, went in a different room, sit on my living room table, and it worked from the first moment on, perfectly fine. So that was just one part of it. And it was really, it was a great experience to go back there for 10 times for the former sessions.
Yep.
and concentrating, because it's quite ambitious to concentrate for 30 seconds, let go for 30 seconds, concentrate
Yep.
again, and this going on for 20 minutes. At first I thought, that should be, I don't know if I will keep up, but I got into the groove and I really like doing it.
Yeah, it's a very strange form of meditation, kind of.
Yes.
It's also exhausting, which is one of the reasons why I advise people to only do one session in a day, even less sometimes. One person did all 10 sessions in a row. I said, well, that's not such a great idea. But the way he did it was he actually got a room in a hotel and spent all day in that room in the hotel with no distractions and just blasted it. So, okay, I mean, I can't stop people from doing what they want to do, but I think it's a difficult task. It's not the sort of thing you normally do.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, the most successful way to get the LED to turn white was just to imagine whiteness. So I didn't try to understand the technical part of it because I'm really bad at that. I just understood, okay, the lamp has to go white. Well, go into whiteness. And I imagined being immersed and being whiteness myself. And doing that, I very seldom looked at the laptop screen on the line going up or down. I just let me be guided by the droning tone. And sometimes I would squint at the laptop. Okay, white, but fine. And I stayed with this being white for 30 seconds, and then okay, something else, and then again. That was how I worked with it. Again, my imagination.
Right. And see that of course that's a magical method, right? You don't care what the underlying details are. And in these experiments, most people don't care. I mean, even if you're a physicist and you know exactly what is going on technically in it, it's still very difficult to imagine getting knowledge from a photon. What does that even mean? It's moving really fast and it's really tiny and all of that. So yeah, after a while, people develop strategies that are much less abstract because otherwise you can't even think about such things. And there's pretty good evidence that the more analytical you are about such a task, the worse you do.
Mm.
So that's why I figured the entire experiment then, every time anybody does an experiment, not just psi experiments, any experiment, they're thinking magically, right? I want a certain outcome, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this. But of course, when you do it as a science experiment, you also have all these things that you put in place so that you're making as sure as you can that you're not fooling yourself, because who wants to waste that kind of time? So I put a lot of bells and whistles in this experiment to try to prevent that. The results are what they are. And so it's a little bit unusual in that to get a significant result, I actually did a little magical procedure in the final analysis. I have all the 447 people, 470 sessions. Press the button on the analysis, and you can watch it going as it's going. And I'm thinking that better work. I hope it works. So I was happy to see that one of the analyses worked. And so is that valid as a scientific test? Well, I think the truth is, anytime any scientist does an experiment, they are doing that. So the magic is happening whether they even admit it or not. So I don't mind admitting it.
Hmm. So now you've analyzed it, and as you said, the results are significant. So what does it mean for our understanding of reality?
Well, it is additional evidence suggesting that there is something about the nature of mind and consciousness, and they're not exactly the same thing, but something about a mind-matter interaction that is related to intention. In this case, it's a somewhat mild intention in that you want a certain outcome, and you're using the feedback as a way of judging whether or not you're getting that outcome. But it's part of now 70 or 80 years of experiments looking at mind-matter interactions in various ways. The only reason why I'm using this particular style is because it can inform an outstanding question in physics, right? The quantum observer effect is not a resolved issue by any means, but it is one of the valid ways of thinking about, well, what does it mean to have a quantum observer effect? What does that actually mean? So this is, again, adding to the toolkit where we can say that the nature of observation in this case has something to do with awareness, human awareness, which means, and physicists don't like this very much, it means that our understanding of the physical world has to include consciousness in some way. And there's a lot of resistance from the psychological side because we don't want to deal with physics, and there's resistance on the physics side because we don't want to deal with the mind. Nevertheless, we're looking at some sort of psychophysical interaction that is happening. And that's part of what's one of the reasons why there's a paradigm shift happening within science as a whole. The recognition that anybody who's producing a theory of everything, typically within physics, if it doesn't include consciousness in some way, it is not a theory of everything. It's a theory of some things, which is still good, but it's not the whole thing. So that's the paradigm shift that I see happening.
Do you see a paradigm shift happening also in the possibility of publishing? Because in your book, I just re-listened to it over the last wiki, and you gave the example that you were trying, or I think it was you trying to publish some of those papers, and that were retracted afterwards, and the publisher like writing you that he's basically not going to publish anything from you if you don't publicly deny the effect of science stuff. Do you see a change in that, or is that still mainly going on?
That is still difficult because there are enough people who have been entranced with scientism because they don't know any better, that that science progresses by funerals, right? That's what Max Planck said. And he's right, that it takes new generations of people coming along who don't have the same internal constraints that they think about. And I can't blame editors for feeling this way because they don't know the history of science, and they don't know the sociology of science or the philosophy of science. And so their views of what is allowable is shaped both by what they've learned, and they haven't learned beyond that. But it's also shaped by sociological conditions that if you are, especially if you're an academic, and you have to go along with what other people think. Otherwise, you become shunned, or if you don't have tenure, you don't get tenure. So academics learn very quickly that within that context, you are allowed to think and say certain things and not other things. But will that change? Yes, that will change. It's taking a long time because what we generally do as social creatures, we watch what our leaders say is allowable. And so now, as more and more thought leaders in different disciplines, physics and neuroscience and psychology and so on, they're coming out and saying, you know what, maybe we're a little bit too quick in deciding that consciousness wasn't all that interesting after all. And so it's becoming mainstream. And it's becoming mainstream in the way that is compatible, increasingly compatible with the notion that the kinds of things that we've been studying and magic in general are not so strange after all. I mean, as you well know, we're dealing with an overlay of the way that entertainment has portrayed magic.
Yes.
In films, it devolves into horror. It devolves into the occult. It devolves into things that are presented. So we have to get beyond stereotypes that have been embedded in people's brains for such a long time that they find it very difficult to think in any other way. But that will change.
Yeah, at the same time, I'm not sure how much of this style or this occult theme might be necessary for at least some forms of magic. So I'm not sure if going beyond those things can be done in some practices if it's not needed. I'm not sure. Like I'm thinking about working with spirits or something. There might be some relationship, there might be some issues with the style you do because let's just assume spirits. I mean, we are a magical channel, so we talk about it all the time. But when you assume the assumptions of spirits, there might be just something there that the spirit needs for a certain action to happen, and the spirit might not be interested in what preferences of style science might have. So that's always a thing I think about when doing stuff or when discussing things like that. And I think there would be a lot of practices that could be where the occult could be thrown out in settings like the experiments you do. But I think if you were expecting really like macro psi effects, like the big things, like the the fireworks going off. There might be sometimes the need for weird stuff that might freak other people out. So yeah, we'll see. We will see.
Yeah. What are this is related to the issue of the limits of psi, right? Completely secular, nothing about spirits. It's all about humans and all of that stuff. What are the limits of that? We don't know, right? So when I bent this spoon, bent the bowl of the spoon in half, I don't have any sense that there were spirits helping me do that. I think it was me, but nevertheless, we don't know. And I use this as an example of what are the limits of a psychokinetic effect. Well, I know that that spoon cannot be bent if you take your fingers and do that. So something else is going on at some level. And that's probably the tip of the iceberg. So the big stuff that you're talking about, before I bent that spoon, I was pretty skeptical that such things were even possible, because mainly what I see are small statistical anomalies in various kinds of instruments. But I'm more convinced now that the big things can happen, probably do. The question is, how is it happening? And so while the techniques of magic, it's true, the techniques of magic are not, many of which are not really compatible with scientific methods at this point. But my hope is that we project 20 years in the future or 50 years or something like that, science is really good at figuring out how to study such things. And so at some point, maybe we'll learn, yes, there really are spirits, and the spirits can do something that we can't do. And do the spirits have sociological constraints too? Is there some academy of spirits and they're allowed to do certain things and not other things? You know, we don't, I don't know. Maybe somebody else knows. But these are things that once you conceive of the possibility of asking the question, then are people clever enough to figure out what to do? Well, yeah, we're pretty clever. We can figure it out. There's always that danger lurking in the background that we understand something that we maybe shouldn't, or not that we shouldn't understand it, but we're not mature enough to know what we're dealing with. It's like giving a baby an atomic bomb, right? So you have a red button on the top that will blow up the bomb, and you tell the baby, don't do this. And that'll guarantee that they're going to press the button.
Yeah, I just had a question, but I just lost it.
So press the button.
What do you plan to do afterwards? So you have this the results, and it's difficult to publish. Do you have something planned where to go with it, or are you focused now on your work with your company?
No, I have two jobs. So yeah, so my noetics job, I'll be able to publish it somewhere, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it'll be I mean, I prefer to publish it in a top tier scientific journal. They're not going to be very happy with it, so I don't think I'll even bother. But there are lots of other journals that are more open to this stuff, so that's not going to be a problem. The next stage is I have a long list of things that I'm waiting to do, like other projects and things that are funded and waiting for my attention to be able to go there. So I have no problem in sucking up all of my time doing something on the scientific side.
Yeah.
And on the other side, on the company side, as chairman, my job, as in any company, is being on the board of directors and making sure that things keep moving ahead. But I'm not the CEO, so I'm not directly involved in day-to-day stuff. I'm more valuable actually as bringing in people. It's like my network and their networks bring in people who we need at the time. So we're a virtual company, just like most of IONS is now virtual, which has the great advantage in that we can pull in people from anywhere in the world. So, and that's true on both sides. Now we collaborate at IONS with people around the world, and we collaborate in the company Cognigenics with people around the world too. So the disadvantage is that I get to meet most people as in little flat screens, little tiny screens, but all over the world all the time. So I have a much larger network than I used to, but in many cases I haven't never met the people in person.
That's what cutting edge exploration looks right now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in not too many years, we will have virtual reality versions of this. And then the need to meet people in person will slowly begin to dissolve, I think, as it gets
Well,
better and
let's
better.
hope it doesn't die out completely.
Yeah.
To
No.
physically connect to people again.
Yeah.
But we will see.
Hmm?
Yeah, I would say let's wrap it up.
Yeah, I think that was a fascinating insight in how our mind works and your mind works. Thank you so much for letting us in on that. And I'm looking forward to your publication. Please let me know, and we can put it in the show notes afterwards. Of course, for all our audience, your website, the website of IONS is in the show notes, and your books. Rudolf, what else?
Not really. Just for everyone who has never heard of you for some reason on our channel, read the book or the books, but mainly the Real Magic one. If you're interested in hearing about some experiments, some results that are really spectacular, they can also be very helpful in doing magic, which is still one of the main things I always take out of it, is the idea that the belief in magic makes magical results way more likely. That's really important to understand when you start in magic or when you want to be successful in magic. That's one of the really helpful tips I would give people. Like, just give it a go and just try to believe into it, and you will see better results.
Yeah. And so it's true that in that book and in the book that I'm writing now, we can do experiments to show, does belief matter, even in an experimental context, and absolutely it matters a lot. So the value then of, for some people anyway, the value for a book that is looking at magic from a scientific perspective is, it's like a hyper rational way of thinking about, is that really a thing? Is that like a real thing that I can believe just rationally? And the answer is yes, it's a real thing. It's not as spectacular as what you see in movies, but nevertheless, it's real, right? So then you could have a higher level of confidence and belief in it, because we can actually evoke some of these things in the controlled environment. So the book that I'm working on now will come out sometime next year. The working title is just the word magic, but the subtitle is A Practical Guide for the Modern Mind. And it's getting more, and I have more things about it, practice in there. But the modern mind is important, because if somebody was somebody is an indigenous person living in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, they don't need or care about what science has to say about anything. But for people who've gone through a pretty traditional scientific education, after a while, you become so inculcated in what you're being taught, that if you're not simultaneously taught about the history of science and the philosophy and the sociology of science, you will easily come to believe that we know much more than we actually do. We're a young species on a tiny planet in the middle of nowhere. And so people who are saying now that we basically understand everything, that's just silly.
It didn't hold up 100 years ago when people tried to say that. So
no, every 100 years you can look at the thought leaders of the time who are saying, well, this is impossible. And then a couple of years later, they're showing, no, actually, it is possible. So, yeah. So that's what that's about, including a few experiments that are so bizarre. These are scientific experiments that I think will actually advance. It's like a forerunner of how science can advance the practice of magic, because of the very, very strange results of these experiments, including one that probably nobody has ever heard of before, and a few others, including one that used to be, it wasn't exactly classified, it wasn't secret, but no one knew that this took place. And I'll give you a little tidbit here. Many years ago, 1965, in Science, top-rated science journal, there was a study involving identical twins and looking at telepathy between them. So that was published, and it wasn't a very good study. It was a qualitative study, literally looking at the EEG squiggles on a piece of paper and using that as a way of saying, see, the telepathy showed up. So it was a very strange article to show up in the top-rated science journal. And of course, people wrote letters saying that, what are you doing? What is this? Well, there's this story behind that I discovered. So I reveal that in the book to find out, well, what was this about? Who were these people? These were not people who were known as parapsychologists. They're people who were real people, but they had never done this experiment before. And then it was a follow-up, which is the thing that I had to discover by going into one of the government archives to find it. And so I found it. I got a little bit more of the story underneath it. So when people ask, are governments like the US government still involved or have been involved in these sorts of things? Yes.
Of course.
Obviously.
Yeah.
I think I would be really interested what the private sector is doing at the same time. Like there must be some really, really weird shit going on in some private facility somewhere without oversight. I mean, there have been some experiments regarding telepathy. I think was it Sony, I think, that accidentally had some weird, like in the gaming industry, they found some interesting stuff. And so, yeah, would be really interesting to have an insight there. But I'm really looking forward to your book and to your further experiments. Yeah, keep us up to date, or whatever it is you say in English. Keep us posted. No,
Posted, yes.
English.
Okay.
You know what I mean.
Dean Radin, thank you so much for being our guest. It has been an honor participating in the experiment, talking with you. I'm looking forward to your other work that comes up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All the
The word is magic.